following stories contain content that some viewers might find upsetting. In the last couple of days, two very disturbing stories involving child abuse have surfaced on social media. In the first, you see a Limpopo police constable who has now been arrested after a video emerged on social media depicting the woman raping her 10-year-old son. In the second incident, a man believed to be a Cape Town businessman is caught on camera beating a woman believed to be his wife, while the couple's child, attempts to intervene and protect the mother. Joining us is Dr. Shahida Omar, who is the director at the Teddy Bear Clinic. Thank you so much for making time for us, Dr. Omar. These incidents are so disturbing, more so because there are children that are involved, but that's what's playing out in many homes, isn't it? And many of those cases we don't even know about.
Indeed, Clement, I think you are absolutely correct when we say the under-reporting, the under-frequent reporting, and many of these cases continue to violate children without these children actually receiving any intervention or these children being protected. The reality, unfortunately, is this is so alarming, disturbing, distressing, because who are violating these children? If we look at those two videos and reflecting on the incidence and prevalence of brutalization and violation of our children, it's people who are closely connected and associated with the children. They are supposed to protect and ensure the safety of the children. Unfortunately, they are the actual perpetrators. So if one looks at the issue of trust, the issue of deception, the issue of lack of reliance or dependability, where home is supposed to be the place of safety, unfortunately, home is actually a place of danger where children are subjected to the most gruesome violation. Now, if we look at one thing, that nobody is above the law. And in the first video, where the policewoman is the mother of the child, we know law enforcement is there to ensure safety, law and order, protecting everybody. And of course, children who are a marginalized population group require this kind of protection and safety. And Section 28 of the Constitution speaks to the safety and the rights to safety and protection of children. Section 110 of the Children's Act speaks to reporting, mandatory reporting, that it's a legal obligation to report. If anybody has any information, knowledge, suspicion, they should report it. Failure to report constitutes a criminal offense. We know that people are often afraid to report because of legal repercussions or, any kind of untoward legal lawsuits against them. But it's important that people realize that failure to report could result in the death of one child and, of course, continue to perpetuate that cycle of violence. So, again, in sections, I spoke about Section 110 of the Children's Act, but Section 54 of the Children's Act also speaks to reporting to child-designated officials and the law enforcement. Now, we really feel that this is not acceptable. But looking at the second video, what actually happens here, we speak about the scourge of violence, we're speaking to gender-based violence, and we're finding that there's a perpetuation, because what happens to children, they actually cannot make sense of it. This young child trying to protect his mother, which is a normal response to an abnormal situation. And the reality is that children then either become victims or victimizers in their future interactions with people and perpetuate the cycle of violence where they find themselves in relationships. Either they're bullying as children, they withdraw, and we see behavioral manifestations, emotional, psychological behaviors that, of course, affect children, and their trajectory is affected. So there are many implications and long-term consequences of children being exposed directly, indirectly, and even other children that are witnessing or learning about this. Certainly it impacts on the brain and results in many changes in their behaviors, often maladaptive behaviors that one cannot begin to understand. And children are often labeled as naughty, bad, mad. And unfortunately, these children are actually crying out for help and acting out.
We saw the levels of violence, Dr. Omar, against women and particularly children increase during the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown. As an organization dealing with the crimes against children, are you still seeing high numbers of cases reported?
Indeed, Clement, an excellent question to ask. Unfortunately, the numbers have not reduced. In fact, we think from our statistics and what we are dealing with on the ground in our interventions, more and more children are victims of gender-based violence. We know both women, violence against women, violence against children. But one could also look at the flip side of the coin and say because there's greater awareness, more resources, more platforms that are coming forward to reach out to these victims, that the reporting is also a positive sign that people are coming forward and reaching out for intervention and support.
With the information that is available in the media about the first incident involving the police constable, the perception often is that only men perpetuate crimes of this nature. How common is this type of crime?
So it's actually very common, Clement. I think people often, this misperception, we know that females are often seen as the primary nurturers, caregivers, protectors, and providers, providing emotional security to children. However, we are actually seeing in different, contexts, where even within the school context, where female educators are violating children, are grooming children, very subtly, where we found young boys coming forward, feeling depressed when the whole thing has been exposed and discovered, where they feel that this person loves them and this person is in distress, the educator, and they need to reach out and protect and save this person. So it's not only just within the home context or even outside, where often young boys, adolescent boys see it, your 13, 14, 15-year-olds see it as a conquest, not realizing that they are actually being pursued and sexualized and violated. So it is common. And we also look at maternal filicides, where more women are resorting to murdering their children, killing their children. Previously, if we looked at the statistics, it was non-existent.
Yeah.
There were no reports of this nature. However, we're actually finding an increased incidence of women violating children sexually, physically, emotionally.
Will this child have to appear in court and testify against his mom? He's still young. What would normally happen in the legal and court process?
Well, ideally, this child should not be subjected to secondary trauma or, secondary victimization. If the child has to appear in court, it would firstly be, in a separate room with the support of an intermediary. So the child does not come face to face with the court, does not hear anything, is not subjected to any intimidation, but that the questions that would be relayed to the child would be via the intermediary. So the child would not see anybody, would not hear anybody, but it would be child-friendly language, and the child would be allowed to relax. If the child needs support, and it would be in a very supportive environment. So I think that is something that one needs to ensure, that this child is not subjected to any further trauma.
Yeah, with our levels of domestic violence, and you've mentioned how children are bound to be caught up, when they're bound to be caught up in such violence, it's traumatizing for them, and I imagine it can even alter the way that they perceive relationships. What are the signs, Dr. Omar, to look out for? And what do you do when you think a child is in distress or is exposed to such violence?
So, one needs to look at this different manifestations. One would see behavioral indicators, the psychological indicators and emotional indicators. So the behavioral manifestations could be suddenly a child withdraws, isolates himself or herself, refuses to engage in activities that they previously participated or enjoyed, withdraws from any school engagement, where previously they were coping and now there's lack of interest and not an ability to even pay attention, so lack of the attention span or concentration. But also if you're looking at psychological indicators, there would be self-destructive, self-mutilating behaviors, and it could be a precursor to substance abuse, promiscuous behavior, eating disorders, either eating too much or suddenly stop eating, and then of course sleeping disturbances would be another psychological manifestation. But if we're looking at the emotional behaviors, this could also be, where they're self-cutting, starting to cut, or it's all about loss of control, the dynamic of power and control, and feeling helpless and hopeless. It's almost as if they cannot exit this, or they feel trapped. But I also just want to make a quick point about this young boy who has to actually deal with the fact that he has been violated by his mother. Yeah. Firstly, the mother is a protector, nurturer, but there would be feelings of ambivalence, and I think that's something we must also factor in when we're working with children, because he will continue to love his mother, but it's the action, the behavior that has become unacceptable, inconceivable, and will never make sense to me. So the multiple losses that children face as well.
All right, Dr. Shahida Omar, I appreciate your time for us this afternoon.